Giving us some time, of your busy day. We wanted to just bring this back, this urban waterway transfer project back in front of council, really just trying to get some steer on some next steps in that. But this is something that HBRC and NCC have been working on for some time. I think you all know me, Phil Kelson, I'm the Manager of Water Strategy. We've got Andrew Lebiota.
Hello, yes, Lebiota. Came to you a few times with the IAF, but also doing the water transition for Napier City Council. I guess we're going to ask you a couple Slido questions through this, only 3, so I hope it isn't too onerous, but there's the QR code. You might be able to scan that from your smartphone or device from there. If not, if you just go to slido.com and enter in that number, which will appear again when we do ask the questions, just a good way for us to capture your thoughts that we'll be discussing. And then joining us as well, you've got Stu Cross from Morrison Road.
Kia ora. I think some of you may have seen me almost 2 years ago to the day when I came to the previous council to present the same stuff, and at that time the timing was awful because you guys were just heading into an election. We had Labor government's 3 water reform going on with a whole pile of uncertainty around that. All of those things coming into what created a difficult timing for anyone to be able to make any kind of decisions about wanting to do anything voluntarily in the water space. Hopefully now we're in a little bit of a different environment so that we can actually start thinking about the principles as to why we might want to do that, and that's what we're going to take you through today.
Yeah, so people can see the code.
Oh, it'll come up again actually on the first question. Okay. So instead of risking trying to go back. That's all right.
Never go back.
Keep moving forward. Keep moving forward.
So I think one thing we just wanted to throw out there for a real just open-ended conversation for you to think about, even just throw us your ideas, is what does stormwater mean to you, and what does it mean to your community? When you think about stormwater and the management of it, if you will, or its effects, what comes to mind?
We've got a code.
Comes down like today,
Yep.
floods.
Flooding, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Roads run off.
Yep. Slips, potentially as well. Some of that.
Yeah.
Water quality.
Water goes through your house.
Very good. Insurance.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
leakage.
Community understanding.
Pollution.
Yeah. So I've had a few environmental comments actually there that aren't flooding related, which is interesting. Good to hear. Death.
Yes, people being displaced from their homes.
Permanently.
Well, they just got new homes.
So with that in mind,
misuse and abuse.
the environmental effects, the flooding ramifications, insurance, what would you expect from, as a community member or as councillors, Napier City Council to be doing about that?
Mitigating all of those things. Preventing deaths, getting rid of the water, so it doesn't flood homes and streets and all of those things.
Not polluting the Ahuriri estuary like it is now.
Acting on the issues.
And I'd go so further as saying knowing what the issues will be and being prepared for them.
Yeah.
Yep.
Preparation
Planning
for
for the future.
and resilience and having a, this every day what happens, and then what happens when we do get major water. What's our plan? How can it go? Are there different ways it can go? We can direct it, and having those resources in place so that can happen, where it can be stored, all that stuff. Not just pray and hope.
Having grills on the drain so that the rubbish doesn't go down, things like that, basic stuff.
I think with the planning stuff though, it's really, what I would expect from council is clear communication to the community as to what the priority is with stormwater. So it's so that they know what to expect from us as well, and so that we can build confidence for them.
I think that's quite poignant because that comes actually later in some issues that have been identified. So then with a different lens, I guess we're trying to figure out what would you expect regional council to be doing in that space as well. There's probably some overlap. Maybe you want to see clear distinctions, but in your minds, is there something that you would expect differently or even the same of Napier City?
Work with us.
Yeah.
Work with us well.
Collaboration.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Keep the channels open.
Clear lines of responsibility, but working together where required. And also upper catchment stuff, things that affect Napier but are outside of our.
Network.
So I expect them to be looking after erosion control on the foothills of, that sort of their environmental regulation stuff.
Good community communication, like comms, so that public know what we're trying to achieve, because I think some of the comms in the past haven't been very clear, so people don't understand what we're supposed to do with stormwater. Yeah.
Forecasting, their hydrology is the essence to tell us what's coming.
Yep.
Data.
Modelling.
Funding contributions where appropriate.
So can I ask you where your understanding of where Hawke's Bay Regional's responsibility is and where Napier City's Council's responsibilities are and where they meet and where they maybe overlap or where there is a lack of clarity? Does anyone
We've got a report
understand
on
that?
Yeah.
Don't understand it, but I certainly know if there's a drain that needs to be cleared out, or if there's a drain problem, it's everyone else's fault.
It's everyone else's fault.
So it's not ours, it's theirs, and then it's ours, not theirs.
Yeah, do they know? Do we know?
We have a
Our
report
role
on
is
this.
stormwater management, their role is flood mitigation.
Yep, and what's the line?
And as we urbanly sprawl, we're starting to get into more of that country, county type thing, and we're starting to have the mismatch. Natural waterways were deemed, I guess, regional council, and ones that were made after the earthquake to flow water were city council. Just knowing who's responsible for what.
Yeah. Okay, you guys have probably just covered a whole pile of workshops that I've had with council staff and written my business case for me almost already, right? Which is fantastic in terms of what we're trying to get everyone to align and understand, right? We're starting this from a principles perspective. I'm going to try and keep this as high level as we can when we go through this conversation, because I've got spreadsheets in front of me on a computer. If I have to open those spreadsheets, we're probably going too far down the rabbit hole for this conversation.
We don't need to see the spreadsheet.
So just a little bit of background about the arrangement that we have in Napier, and I'm not going to go right back into history when we had the county councils and the county drainage boards, but that's where it all began. What we have at the moment is really what's important, right? And what we have at the moment is we have Hawke's Bay Regional Council owning a significant open drainage network across the Napier urban environment. So there's a drainage catchment that covers Napier, Miani and Puketapu, and there's another drainage catchment that covers the Brookfields, Awatoto area near the Tutaikuru River. The network has pump stations, it's got detention dams up on the hill, it's got floodgates, it's got culverts, and it's got open drains as well. So it's a relatively large, relatively complex network. It's not just ditches on the side of the road. And I guess that's the key point here. We're really starting to get into complicated territory here, and I think this is probably where we're starting to get into it should have been them that cleaned the drain, we should have cleaned the drain, who should have cleaned the drain. The maintenance and operation of these drains is carried out by both Hawke's Bay Regional Council and Napier City Council. There are contracts from Hawke's Bay Regional Council to Napier saying, Napier, can you please do the work on this particular thing? And vice versa in some cases where specialist equipment may be needed that Hawke's Bay Regional Council owns that Napier City Council doesn't. So we have work trucks out on these drains. Sometimes there's a Napier truck out on one side of the drain potentially and maybe a Hawke's Bay Regional one on the other side. I don't think that would often happen at the same time, but the point is that you have different vehicles, different communications, and at least from the public's perspective, that can be really confusing as to who's responsible. And the drains were originally designed to provide land drainage to rural environments. And I think it's important to understand that land drainage is a very different thing to stormwater drainage, right? So stormwater is about catching runoff over impermeable surfaces, goes down into the stormwater channel, runs off. Land drainage is about removing stagnant, still water off effectively farming land to make that land productive. So it had a different purpose, and it's on land that is typically permeable. The water can actually drain away a little bit by itself. It's free draining into the soil, often when you set up a land drainage scheme. But these would have been set up so long ago that these drains would have existed at a time when Napier was not as urbanised as it is now. And now, they form a critical part of Napier City Council's stormwater network, and I think the next slide probably tries to highlight some of that.
Yes, that's just a little overview of some of the urban waterways that are HBRC assets and Napier City assets. What the colors actually indicate right now are just the level of service that those open drains are delivering to the community. So you can see that, certain areas like Plantation Drain, the lower areas of the old Tutaikuri riverbed actually don't deliver that great of a level of service. But that's a HBRC asset. So when we're trying to deliver a level of service to our community, utilizing assets that aren't in our ownership to control that level of investment and upgrades, it's obviously quite difficult to do what we have set out to our community on.
Yeah, and so if we look at, for example, the Plantation Drain is probably the long well, I might stand here, right? Because people probably don't know the names of all these different drains. We've got the Plantation Drain running up here, which is the purple asset. That's got less than a 10-year service on it. The Plantation Drain actually goes a little bit further. It has mixed levels of service along its length in terms of what it can provide. We've got another drain down here, the County Drain. That drains south into the cross-country drain when it's overflowing, but also that typically drains north up into the early estuary. Again, when we look at here, this is a highly urbanised environment. You guys are more familiar with Napier than I am, but within here, what we don't show is all of Napier City Council's stormwater assets draining into these drains. That is where the stormwater from those areas go. It goes to these drains, which is then meant to be pumped out either up to the estuary or down to the cross-country drain out. And then the other area we're looking at down here is an October area, probably a little bit
I think we have to have a consent, don't we, to discharge stormwater into the Ahuriri estuary from the Hawke's Bay Regional
So
Council.
there are consents held for a number of these, and the pump stations there are consents for most of them. Some of those consents are dual-owned consents, which makes them really complicated to manage, and some of those consents are solely held by the Hawke's Bay Regional Council or Napier City Council. And I think there's a couple of drains, and Russell might know better than I do even, that don't have consents but probably should. Correct, yeah.
I think,
Mission, maybe?
I think, yeah.
What about the
Regional Council
typo?
had about 5 pump stations that didn't have consents, and we've got one, Onehunga Road, that doesn't have a consent, yeah, which we're working through.
Where was the typo on that map? Did you have that?
Oh, if you want to go there. Pretty sure.
Error.
We got it on our screen.
Yeah. It's gone to Taupo.
Oh, see, I'm just, see, I
I knew it. I just couldn't see it on there. I know it goes.
There we go. Now we're not.
Ignoring it.
No. No, it goes
No.
along
To the
Taradale.
left,
Closer to
to the left.
Yeah.
There it is.
You can see it flooding.
It hasn't got it going out.
It looks like it stops at Park Island.
Yeah,
but
it does.
carry
It doesn't stop there.
Goes right
It carries on right to the estuary.
Yeah.
to the front.
Yeah. Might not.
It is. Just not drawn all the way there. That's a drawing issue, not a...
It ends at Park
I'm pretty
Island.
sure it doesn't end there.
No, it doesn't. Okay.
How are we going to take video of that picture of it from all the way over there
Are we just moving on?
for the QR?
Oh, have you gone too far?
That's the first question.
Okay.
So this is that first vital question. I don't know if you can use this QR code, but we have the
Can't read it.
number to join as well.
Yeah.
Basically, what we're just asking is, what do you see the risks to Napier City Council or the community if no action on this matter is taken? So if we just maintain the status quo, utilizing what's a pretty outdated agreement, I would say, between HBRC and Napier City Council on the management of those urban waterways, what are the risks that you can see? And it's free text, so just put in as much as you like. And yeah, we'll discuss those results when you're finised.
I think you can put in more than one thing, so yeah, we'll give you a couple of minutes.
What have we got there?
It's not a test, you're allowed to.
All I
Coming
get
up
is
already.
some,
Yep.
like, generic Slido thingy.
It's like they've seen the slide deck already.
I can't get it up, sorry. I put it in the Google and all I got was some generic Slido page. Oh, enter code here. Okay, it's another time I have to enter code.
Yeah. Oh, come on.
I think they've got it all down there.
The list is actually getting so long, we're losing.
Oh, we're getting some common answers as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's some really clear answers coming up through here that you'll see that we're probably already, like I say, you've pretty much written my slide deck for me, so, and the business case now, so you're doing a really good job for me. Thank you. Do we want to, can you scroll through that when it's up?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure that out, to be honest. I didn't want to.
Yeah, maybe not.
I really just want to get out of the presenter.
I think.
End.
I don't know how you did that. No,
Yeah, sorry.
just leave it in presenter view.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, I
Right.
guess like key themes coming through, increased flooding, damaged infrastructure, like that eroding confidence in local government. Obviously, there's a bit of a, all of that is political risk, if you will, that your community lacks trust in you, increased costs. Yep, exactly. Is there anything
Yep.
else you want to discuss?
No,
or
no,
can we
no.
move on?
So I think these are what we've come up with, I guess, in terms of our dual ownership creating issues. Right? So dual ownership creates issues in terms of funding, and the key issue there being that Hawke's Bay Regional Council doesn't have the ability to levy development contributions in the areas where it may need to do upgrades on infrastructure that it may otherwise be able to fund through development contributions. We can have misaligned levels of service, and I think that was pretty clear just from that map that we had, but also when we talk about land drainage assets, a regional council would normally have land drainage asset levels of service that are based on a certain amount of runoff off the land over a certain amount of time. It's a different standard and a different approach to what we have when we talk about the Building Act requirements and stormwater assets, which we talk about a 1 in 50 year or a 1 in 100 year event and the ability to respond to that. So there are differences in how we even just describe the level of service, let alone how we respond to that level of service. We know multiple points of accountability, and I think we've already heard about that, the finger pointing, it was their responsibility to do this, it was my responsibility to do that. And that was something that it wasn't really pointed out, I guess, if we go right back to history about why this work was started, we talk about the 2020 floods and the November 2020 floods and the CDM report that came out about that, which did point to the need to resolve some of this stuff around multiple points of accountability. It didn't find that that was a cause of any of the flooding and the response, but it did point to the fact that as an ongoing arrangement, it was really complicated. We have competing priorities, right? So you guys have a whole pile of priorities for your region which are potentially different, or for your city which are potentially different to what Hawke's Bay Regional Councils are. In fact, Hawke's Bay Regional Council has investment across its entire region that it needs to deal with and manage. It's now got a report from Cyclone Gabrielle that says you've got to look at stop banks and flood resilience and flood infrastructure, which is a different set of infrastructure to this, but they've got a huge pressing need now to invest or to put a lot more money into that. Where are they going to find the money to put into urban drainage, right? What's going to come first? What's going to come second? And we need to think about those as well when we look at this. We've got emergency response coordination as well at the moment, because we've got joint assets across our stormwater network when we're dealing with an emergency response. And I'm not operational on that emergency response stuff. I'm sure Phil can probably talk to it a bit more than me, but we have two groups of people who have different assets that they need to manage and operate. Is that-
Yeah, and an example, like during the cyclone was a really good example of, some of the issues that highlighted with HPRC trying to control their systems around the Taipo and around Awatoto, and their communicating with us really created an extra level of complexity that during those first few hours was really tricky to navigate.
We have inefficient processes for things like minor capital works. So at the moment, we've got a maintenance contract. So Hawke's Bay Regional Council contract Napier to maintain things like the county pump stations and the assets on there. If during that maintenance operation there is something that requires actually capital investment from Hawke's Bay Regional Council, there's an approval process that they have to go through that is different to what you would have probably otherwise had at Napier to get that streamlined effort through. And then we've got effectively the mindset of the operation of them as separate networks. This continuous thing of these are open drainage assets, these are stormwater assets. They're not. They are all stormwater assets for the purposes of Napier City Council, and continuing to operate them as though they are different or separate is probably part of the continuous issues.
Yeah, just to add on to that, they're all interlinked. So the open drains and the pump stations don't operate as separate things. The upstream effects of the open drainage and the downstream effects affect how the pump station operates, and the pump station affects how the open waterways operate. So, they're clearly interlinked, and having separate ownership of parts, that have effects on each other is another complicating factor.
Yeah. And I think we can kind of speak to some of that competing priority as well around big projects like Lagoon Farm, right, where there's an intention that over time that becomes potentially a water storage area for major rainfall events. But if the drains cannot get the water there, then what's the point? And if we can't continue to have that investment situation where we can say, well, Hawke's Bay, you need to invest in this before we invest in Lagoon Farm, and then in Hawke's Bay saying, no, you've got to invest in Lagoon Farm before we invest in the drains. We can't have that continuous debate around whether one asset needs to happen at the other time. It needs to be a coordinated effort that can only easily be achieved through a single source of ownership. So we've been looking at this for a while, but when we first started looking at this, we were looking at what outcomes we're seeking to achieve and what are the problems we're trying to address. So we're looking for a fit-for-purpose operating model. I think by inference, that implies that the current model is not fit for purpose. And we're looking for clear accountability for performance, another issue that I've already heard today from you, sufficient incident response capability. We're looking for clear chains of command and control, coordination and decision-making in an emergency. And we're looking for clarity on the role, responsibility and performance of each organisation. These are outcomes that we think we can achieve through addressing the current situation.
So coming at you with another question then, so keeping in mind of what those outcomes seeking to achieve by addressing that, I want to get your feedback of what the benefits be to Napier, its community, if we took over the ownership of those urban waterway assets.
Everything you just said in the previous slide.
Copy it.
We just want to make sure we didn't miss anything.
We want to make sure that we've got you along on that journey and that you're all agreeing to the same principles here, right? Because if you don't agree to the benefits and the outcomes or the risks of the current situation about this, then we may as well walk away now because you guys aren't going to want to do this transfer, right? So that's the primary thing we're trying to achieve here.
See, we at least got 8 participants typing, so they are engaged. It's a good way of cheating.
At the end of the day, yeah.
Just trying to think if there's anything over and above those on that list already. I'm not just going to regurgitate what you've put up there.
Can't remember what.
How do I find it back in here?
Definitely getting more engagement than I did at the Revenue and Financing Policy Workshop I was telling you about. At the end of a full day of council meetings, I had to present a Revenue and Financing Policy Workshop for 3 hours at the end of that day. And that's a boring topic at the best of times.
We have reviewed ours in recent times, so yes, we
Very
know
painful.
how boring it is.
This is going to cost more though.
This is getting a bit more engagement than that one did, I can assure you.
Okay, that's the positives now, the negatives.
Yeah.
I think, in light of reading them off, I think what is poignant to note is that there is really good alignment to what the objectives of the review set out and what you're highlighting as benefits to the community.
Yeah.
A lot of that clarity of purpose, accountability, control, being able to plan your investment. And really, the next slide was just giving you our strategic priorities and how those objectives can actually really strengthen what the strategic priorities of Napier City Council are, especially around looking at resilience and even that financial sustainability. If we're going to be able to successfully be sustainable financially, we need to know what our level of investment is going to be in things of this nature. I don't know if you want to go on that too much.
No, I think what we're just trying to point out here, I guess, is that you guys have a whole set of priorities that you have put a lot of work into developing, and what we are trying to do is actually achieve a whole pile of these things. So a great visitor destination, we maybe don't take that through a urban waterway thing, but actually, you know, these waterways are on green space corridors that are owned by Napier City Council.
True.
And if we want to use them in a way that is maybe not a traditional drainage asset, I mean, it still needs to perform its function as drainage, but if we're wanting to look at them more holistically about whether they could be
They got bike
cycleways.
Yeah.
Most of them have cycleways down there.
Yeah, so they've got cycleways down them, and your cycleway network is an incredible visitor attraction up here, right?
Yeah.
So there are still elements to which these relate to even your visitor attractions. Spaces and places for all, you need to have an environment where people feel safe, that they're not going to be flooded, that their homes are going to be safe, right? These are all the things that it's also trying to tick and lining up with your objectives and your mission statement. We don't want to dwell too much more on that.
Then coming into another question, though, is that we've seen what the opportunities and benefits to Napier City could be. Asking you if there's risks associated with us taking ownership of those waterways.
How do you go from one to the next? You have to put this thing in every time. Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Very common theme.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Nothing new.
Accountability, like that's a big one.
Someone bit your pot
Not
on.
even the government's blaming them.
We would be responsible.
Can't blame HBS
Yeah.
if things go wrong.
Right.
That's what I put in.
Yeah. But there's some good messages there as well.
Here we are.
I guess going into
Right.
what
Pretty clear. Did we miss anything?
I don't think so, actually, when I look at this. That there's a few little technical risks in terms of the transfer itself as well. So I think we've kind of talked about most of the benefits here, but you know, the ability to make whole of network investment decisions, those are decisions that work best for the whole network, not just ad hoc upgrades. So even if we do get commitment from both councils to do upgrades, are they the upgrades that we would have done if we owned the whole network and could control the whole network ourselves? Improved ability to raise funding for capital works, that's relating to that ability for Napier City Council to collect development contributions in relation to some capital works. Obviously, they would have to relate to growth, but I think there's usually a relatively easy line to draw between increasing runoff into drainage assets and growth. It might only be a small contribution towards those things. Allowing full control over the network in severe weather, allowing HBRC to refocus its efforts into the places that you as a region need HBRC to refocus its assets to, or its effort. And creating a single point of accountability and decision-making, I saw that also come up as a risk. And that's a really, I was a bit nervous about telling you guys that that's a risk because I wanted you guys to figure out that that's a risk for yourselves. But there is absolutely a risk that we take on this, we cannot point a finger.
That's right.
It is our responsibility to invest. When we take this on, we are recognising that we are taking on the need to invest in these assets over the time. That's probably the biggest, from a political perspective, definitely the biggest risk I would imagine to see in here. We've got some other ones that you guys did talk about. There may be a negative long-term impact on borrowing capacity. Some of these assets do need investment in them. They do need significant investment in them. You are probably already debt constrained. They will need investment, and there's probably no two ways about that, right? There may be a negative impact on your borrowing capacity. What we haven't talked about is how this fits with local water done well. Obviously, once these assets were to transfer into Napier City Council, we would envisage that were there a Three Waters model for Hawke's Bay, that they would transfer over with it, just as any other stormwater asset potentially would. That's probably your biggest mitigation towards the borrowing capacity element.
Do HBRC currently have a targeted rate or anything for that?
They absolutely do have a targeted rate on it, and their targeted rate for these schemes is just on the people in the scheme. So we talk about 2 drainage catchments here. We've got the Napier, Miani, Puketapu catchment. So almost everyone in that catchment is in the Napier City area. There's a few places in the Puketapu area which are not, but they would be excluded from this transfer. And then in the Brookfields Awatoto area, that's entirely within Napier City's boundary. But there are targeted rates on both of those that we'll discuss in a little while.
Okay.
So there may not be an offsetting reduction in HBRC rates. That's not to say that HBRC would not stop levying that targeted rate. It's just to say there is always that political uncertainty, I guess, of if we're taking on that rate, how do we get assurance that your rates are going to go down by the amount that ours are going up? You will never be able to prove that, right? Unfortunately, you have to take, I guess, HBRC's word for it, in that the rate no longer is being rated, because every council increases its rates every year, and this is only a small portion of HBRC's rates. It's only a small portion of yours. What it means is their rates won't go up as much as they may otherwise have gone up.
Question.
So it's
What would happen? Sorry. What would happen to the reserve funds that they've collected?
Their reserve funds will most likely be depleted by the time this transfer happens. and through actual investment that is required in this network, right? So they do actually have a capital works program that sees those reserve funds being spent on this network, but their reserve funds are not terribly large.
So that can be evidenced, that
Yeah, I'm sure
that what they've collected has been spent
Yeah.
on these assets.
I'm sure that can be.
You only need to look at the drains to know that they've spent it already, not spent it on their drains.
So is the targeted rate not a line item?
The targeted rate is absolutely line item. So you will see that rate not being on your bill,
Yeah.
but I guess how you have confidence that they're not just collecting the money still through the general rate, I don't know. But yeah.
That's their problem, though.
My question
Oh,
is,
no, I just wanted.
what percentage of their investment in the maintenance and ownership of the assets currently that will transfer is funded through a targeted rate? Surely part of it is through their general rate. It wouldn't be as simple as targeted rate only.
Yeah, it's about, I'm going to get the numbers slightly wrong probably, it's either 90% targeted rate and 10% general, or 95 targeted and 5% general. So it's up in that right at the top. And effectively, that general rate just covers what will be the stranded overhead in the Hawke's Bay Regional Council.
That's really interesting. So the maintenance of urban waterways that are held by HBRC, urban ratepayers have a line item on the regional council's thing for the management of
Absolutely.
open waterways. Yeah, interesting.
Yep.
Thank you.
In addition, rural ratepayers will have it as well in the same area. So your Brookfields Awatoto area, I think at the moment your stormwater rate excludes rural ratepayers, or it has in the past. I think you had some consultation or some decisions that you were making that may have been controversial about bringing some rural ratepayers back into the stormwater rate. So there is a group of people in the Hawke's Bay Regional Council targeted rate area that would be paying it that are probably rural properties for the purposes of your stormwater rate at the moment. What that actually does is probably builds up more of a case for you to shift that revenue and financing policy and the exclusion towards including those rural ratepayers back in.
Is it that easy?
Well, to bring them back in. I don't know what decision you landed on around that exclusion and how you're going to do that, but
Sorry, can I just ask a question? A couple of years ago, we sat in a room discussing this, and we said, geez, this is going to cost money.
Yep.
Why should we pay for it now when Three Waters is going to come in and they can sort it all out? Now we've got, what is it, Water Done affordably coming on stream.
affordability is not going to be part of it.
It's a lot of
Hole in the ground?
Water Done averagely or something.
Yeah, more
coming.
than averagely.
Why are we not waiting for both to
So-
cross?
Really good question. Elephant in the room, I guess, right? Local water done well, and I've been working in water reform for as long as you guys have been studying it, because I've been involved in the Hawke's Bay regional work for a long time with Dan, who you'd be familiar with. My gut feel is I'm still going to be involved in water reform for the same amount of time again as I have been involved in it so far. So I've been involved in water reform for 6 or 7 years. I think I'll still be talking about water reform in 6 or 7 years' time under local water done well. Now that's probably me being a little bit of a cynic, but the reality is local water done well is requiring councils to voluntarily come together and make joint arrangements around water services delivery plans. And I think through the work that you guys have done in the past, and I'm sure through the considerations you're having already around local water done well, it is clearly going to be a very, very difficult challenge to get all councils, or even 2 councils, to agree on the principles of a water services delivery entity going forward. So what we're saying is these are problems that need to be addressed. These are problems we can address without local water done well, and they're problems we can address before local water done well delivers any kind of entity. I think even if you did get agreement with Hastings and or Central Hawke's Bay and or Wairoa around a water services entity going forward, that at the most optimistic time frame, you probably won't have an entity before 1 July 2026, and I would say that that would be working at record-breaking pace to do that.
The stormwater wasn't really properly dealt with, was it, with
No.
the last?
So what I would say is that you can absolutely leave this to local water done well. If you do, remember Hawke's Bay Regional Council has not been part of any conversations around Hawke's Bay Three Waters to date, and I would absolutely implore you that you bring them into the fold in those conversations if you are choosing to defer this until local water done well or something.
Just for information, I pay going to pay $60 a year for urban drainage.
Sorry?
And I live literally down the street here.
Say $60, did you say? Yeah.
Yeah. Targeted rate.
Towards HBRC.
Okay, to HBRC.
So we'd
For the
have,
Miani Puki Tapu.
we'd have to change our rating system to collect.
Well, I think
Regional
the rating decision will have to be made. I think there's effectively in my mind, there's 2 ways you would deal with it, right? And to me, the most simple way is you fold it into your stormwater activity. When we talk about the level of assets that are involved here, we've got assets with about $10 million worth of book value that we're talking about transferring across. Your stormwater assets have about $240 million worth of book value. So we're talking about a relatively small component of what's otherwise your large stormwater network. Oh, Russell's shaking his head about the numbers, eh?
Yep,
Right, did I give you some bad numbers?
just the 10 million, yeah, I believe
Oh,
it's a bit more than that.
It's 26 replacement cost
We've
and,
still got valuation through PDP to come back.
right, okay.
You're probably right, it's probably worth 10 million,
But,
but
yeah.
they're talking it up.
Around the collection of the rates, yeah, you'd probably we'd look at having different rate layers, because there'll be an urban level of
Yeah.
service and a rural level of service.
Yeah. So you have to,
So we'd have to.
yeah, I think the alternative is you set up a targeted rate just for this. The challenge of doing that is operationally, targeted rates are technically ring fenced. You have to, it becomes a little bit of an administrative challenge. It's not necessarily insurmountable, but in my mind, you've got the 2 options: targeted rate for urban open drainage, or then you otherwise have bring it into your stormwater targeted rate, and then potentially bring in differentials or something like that to deal with the difference in urban and rural level of service.
Yeah, it's not cut and dry.
Not completely cut and dry, no.
Yeah. It's kind of just context is that we're doing this the other way with coastal hazards at the moment, and I
Yep.
think that would be a lot more expensive Is it going that way? I don't know.
I don't know what the
Kind of
value is going to
tit-for-tat.
coastal hazards, actually. Do you know,
Money.
Russell, at all?
It's big money.
Question about staffing capability within Napier City Council. Do we have the capability to take on this?
Yeah, I think conversations with your staff and your stormwater staff would indicate that we would have the capability to continue to deal with this. What we have to remember is at the moment, because of the current arrangements, there's actually a whole pile of time that is spent between backwards and forwards between Hawke's Bay Regional Council and Napier City Council as well, which would be freed up. But also, on the other hand, this is part of a broader network, so it just becomes part of your broader network management approach. So I think it's probably largely not a huge uplift in staffing requirements.
There will be some operational staff from HBRC. They have a works group that we contract for some of our drains and waterways. So we would probably, that contract, whatever they're doing for regional council now, would just come in and we'd manage that. So it'd be that sort of, it's almost like a contracted time. So there might be a bit of growth in the depot staff if that's the way council would develop that. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I would say from a capability point of view, the more technical stuff is probably the stuff that Napier specialises in. So the actual pump station operation, things like maintenance, things like that, where the open drains are a little bit more.
Yeah, so my understanding is that the maintenance-y kind of work they do is like weed boating, weed eating, spraying, that kind of activity. So it's not necessarily a technical skill, not to undermine people that do that.
But wouldn't we be looking to bring that in-house because it would defeat the purpose of having it all under one umbrella?
Potentially, but some of that contracting skill that sits in Hawke's Bay Regional Council, remember, you're not the only council that services, and you're not the urban waterways aren't the only assets that are serviced by that capability. So we will have rivers and stop banks and those kind of assets that would remain with Hawke's Bay Regional Council, as well as assets that are in Hastings District, Wairoa District, or Central Hawke's Bay District, where they may be using that team. So you could bring it in. It may not necessarily be what works out to be the most efficient way of dealing with that.
Talk me through your thinking of when Hawke's Bay has a rain event. All right, and we've got our current staffing numbers and we're clearing screens and we're moving things around and doing bits and pieces. And now all of a sudden we've got a couple of extra pump stations. How are we going to man that? Currently we grab a couple of parks guys and they go and manage a bit here and there. But how are we going to manage these other bits where the regional council would be able to staff up and get some of their other staff to help out? How would it happen when it turns to custard?
Yeah, I think Russell kind of answered that question, that operationally we would need some extra.
So it would have to be a provision in the operating contract that you'd have with the works group at Hawke's Bay Regional Council and yourself, so that you'd still draw on those contractors. And that's kind of quite common in contracting arrangements anyhow, right? Where we're contracting out to even a private contractor, there might be provisions in that contract for them to provide staff in emergency events.
Yeah,
There's
and
a
if,
number of people that are doing it now across the two organisations, so we still see that number still being the same, but until you look at some potential efficiencies, but the key is in those events, Richard, they to make sure that we've got those assets and staff capability to deal with those.
because if they work for someone else and Hastings gets rained on at the same time, they don't have a priority to Napier, they have a priority to Napier and Hastings. So where's the guarantee? Because we've been caught out a couple of times now. We don't want to get caught out again. When it's fine, it's great.
Yeah.
When it rains and it turns to custard, where are these extra staff coming from right now?
I think that is absolutely a good question, right? So at the moment, we already have that same workforce already having those competing priorities across Hastings and Napier as well, potentially. But I take your point that in this future environment, those ones that are employed by Hawke's Bay Regional Council would have less loyalty towards Napier potentially than they would to Hastings if they owned the assets in Hastings.
Correct.
I think what we need to, one thing that probably we didn't preface this is, the key for us wanting to present this is we're wanting to get your feedback and comments about what are the gnarly issues that we can make sure we address when we do come to council to say, we need you to make a decision about whether you want to consult on this. And I'm probably jumping a bit ahead, but making a decision about whether you consult, because that's the decision that you will be asked to make when it comes up. It's not whether you do it, it's whether you consult, because these are significant assets and will require a consultation process. But absolutely, if that's a key gnarly issue for you guys, then it needs to be addressed when we come to council about that.
Yeah, like I say, I've got no problem with taking over the assets. I think it you know, all the boxes that you say ticks it. But for me, it's not when the sun's shining the problem, it's when it rains.
Yep.
And it's having the ability to man all those extra pumps and new things.
Yep, absolutely. I think that's a really good point.
Yep.
So is that something you'd want to see in that report, Richard?
Oh, absolutely.
Yep.
Just one more question. Is the money coming out of, would it come out of the rates or an extra amount? I mean, is it already coming out? Would it come out of our normal rates?
Yeah, so effectively, I think most people in Napier are currently paying a rate for these assets already. We would effectively see the responsibility for collecting that targeted rate shift from Hawke's Bay Regional Council to Napier. So Napier would rate for that same activity instead of Hawke's Bay Regional Council. So it would come out of rates through either what we're talking about, a targeted rate on those specific assets for a stormwater rate.
So would people pay extra? Would they pay extra? Or
We
not?
don't believe that they will be paying any extra.
But they'll pay extra to us,
Correct.
and they'll pay less to Hawke's Bay.
Now, yeah, now there is, yes.
It's a question, isn't it?
Yeah. So there is a big, we don't believe there will be paying any extra caveat, which is assuming that you carried on doing exactly the things that Hawke's Bay Regional Council are around its investment, right? The reality is that we know that these need investment. As you need to increase that investment, of course, the rates will go up higher, and they may go up higher than they would have if you continued with the mixed ownership scheme. But that is because you are now delivering a better level of service. So I don't, you know, if the alternative is that you carry on paying the same, but you never get anything that's getting you where you want to be. So I wanted to just caveat that, yes, probably people will pay more, but it's because you're making decisions about investing in the network that may not otherwise be made.
And, yeah, on that, if we want to improve resilience, it's going to
Cost more.
HBRC must have a 10-year plan for infrastructure and drainage and pump renewal and digging out drains and everything.
Yep.
They must have put a dollar figure next to.
There's some dollar figures that are around some of this, yep. So there's been a whole pile of reviews into the drainage catchments that were commissioned by Hawke's Bay Regional Council. Notably, so the Brookfields, Awatoto catchment, there was a study there that recommended upgrades to the Brookfields pump station and the Mission pump station that are quite significant in value. I think it's about $15 to $20 million worth of investment that's happening there. We've got I'm moving ahead on the slides, but those, the investment in those has been committed to already, so that's about to be undertaken. The other area, the Napier, Miani, Puketapu catchment, there's a review that indicates that there might be up to $200 million needed to be invested in those schemes. That review, which obviously no one's agreed to the funding around that, also indicates that of that, though, given that you have a shared network, that actually about 150 million of that might be a Napier City Council share anyhow, without a change in ownership. So none of that is in long-term plans, because like you, Hawke's Bay Regional Council have a 3-year plan, and it's not in the next 3 years.
So chances are it will go to the water entity anyway. And
well, that would be the hope if you get a water entity stood up in time, yep.
well, eventually, by the time that money needs to be spent, it will be.
Or at the least, the debt associated with it will go to a water entity. That would be the plan, I suppose. Assuming a water entity happens, which, like I say, is my big fear of water reform. I'm not here to rag on local water done well. So just to go through what the different options that we did look at were, and again, we presented this to you guys 2 years ago, those of you who were on council at the time. We're looking at an enhanced status quo with due minimums in terms of creating a single operating procedures, plus rationalising some contracts, creating a dedicated role that might be a combined dedicated role across the councils. And then we've also looked at things like formal joint arrangements with CCOs, CCTOs, absolutely over the top for what you're probably trying to achieve, and ultimately settled on these transfer arrangements where we actually did have a different look at how we might transfer assets in different ways. So transferring based on function, that might have actually moved some assets from Napier to Hawke's Bay Regional Council, but would have still resulted in a large scale of confusion, and not necessarily a one network kind of view. Ultimately settling on transferring based on the location and catchment of them, so saying anything that is part of the stormwater network and is within the Napier City urban boundary will be moved into Napier City Council, which is where we settled. Yeah, that's effectively the process that's been going through to determine all the things that we consider to determine where we're going to end up. And noting Russell's comments that there is a PDP report that is being prepared around valuation of assets. This is from an early draft of the PDP report, which has probably been revised and sent backwards and forwards. We think there's $26 million worth of replacement costs of the assets, so that's how much it would cost to replace the assets with like assets right now, not with an upgrade, with replacing it for what it does at the moment, which is often not always up to scratch. About 10 million of book value, so that's the depreciated value of it. That's just the number that's in their accounts. That's not really a very useful number apart from that's the number in their accounts. There's a large number of pump stations with below average condition. We know that. That's through condition assessment that Napier City Council commissioned that identifies a large number of those. And based on remaining useful life, and this is on the remaining useful, condition adjusted remaining useful life, we think there's about $370,000 of renewals need to be done on that network a year for the next 10. That big line at the end, the 96 to 100 years, is not that there's a big bow wave, it's that we're talking about assets. Some of these assets don't depreciate, they're holes in the ground. So they have a very, very long life. We're not anticipating that they're going to need to be replaced. They may need to be made bigger for levels of service, but they're not necessarily going to be replaced.
Is that the waterways?
Yeah, that's all the waterway assets, yeah.
Is there any...
So they're kind of there, but they shouldn't, in a way, I probably shouldn't have put them on the chart.
Yeah, because you don't really renew them or replace
No.
them and maintain them.
Is there any debt associated with the assets?
At the moment, very little. I'd have to get the number out, but like maybe 2 million, if that. I think there is probably a little bit of debt to be incurred over the next few years, but again, not significant amounts of debt.
Yep.
Yeah, this slide just highlights some planned upgrades that HBRC has within that Awatoto catchment. So there's the Brookfields pump station. So upgrading that level of service to a 1 in 50 event by the installation of a 4.5 cubic pump station. Adding resilience with generators kind of akin to what we have at Cross Country Drain. And then similarly at the Awatoto pump station, again catering to that 1 in 50 year event with a 9.5 cubic pump station. So these are committed projects according to HBRC. They're looking to do a design build by naming a contractor hopefully by end of this calendar year. And they're hoping to have physical completion of these by end of 2025, if not into 2026. So these early conversations was that these would be project managed through completion by HBRC, even if this asset transfer did go through. So those would be kind of handed over as turnkey new pump stations once complete.
Everyone likes to see some numbers, and I hate to put numbers up even though I've got an accounting background. These are just off the most recent annual plan numbers. So we've got $1.25 million worth of operational expenditure funded mainly by targeted rate. So $1 million of that is funded by targeted rate. So $1 million of targeted rates we would expect would transfer from Hawke's Bay Regional Council to Napier City Council. This is based on if it was incorporated into your stormwater rate, $40 per property on average, noting that there are differences in the valuation approach and the basis for setting rates between Hawke's Bay Regional Council and Napier, and noting that $40 per property does incorporate all of the properties on your stormwater rate, so some of those may not be within the catchment for the drainage rates at the moment. Which is why there would be a need for a proper rating review about whether that.
Yeah.
But, and when we talk about a rating review there, I'm talking about for the one activity, not for an entire revenue and financing policy again, which would probably be enough to put you off at just doing that. So like I say, about 10 million of book value of assets transferred. That compares to, like I say, around 240 million of book value of your own assets. So it's not increasing the book value of your assets significantly. And there's $650,000 worth of stranded overheads in Hawke's Bay Regional Council, which sounds like a lot. Those overheads are largely related to resourcing, owning the building, IT, software, etc. Some of this is staff that spend 10% of their time on this work. Some of this is an allocation of governance costs, of marketing costs, the whole corporate cost that goes across, and you may be familiar with that whole concept of stranded overheads through discussions about Three Waters in the past anyhow. We do not anticipate that there would be any increase in overheads that Napier City Council have. So this is a big distinction from like a Three Waters model, where a new Three Waters model has its own governance structure, it has its own corporate overheads, it's got its own building. You've already got that building, you've already got that governance structure, you've already got all of those systems in place. So there wouldn't be an increase in overheads necessarily beyond like the cost of a couple of computers if you needed a few extra staff. So we would anticipate that the stranded overhead in Hawke's Bay Regional Council would just be reallocated out under the same basis that they already allocate their overheads out. That really means that it'll be spread across, potentially as a general rate across the entire region, but also potentially within Napier. Again, that's a decision that they're going to have to make about how they fund that. I don't think Section 1013A of the Local Government Act would actually allow them to set up a targeted rate just for a stranded overhead.
Outfield.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's an extra 1% for your ratepayers and theoretically a reduction of that 1% from the Hawke's Bay regional side. So I like to keep referring to a conversation I had with Michael Lovett, who's the Partnerships Director at local government at DIA for local government, where he says ratepayers and taxpayers all wear the same undies. And we just have to remember that our ratepayers and the people who are paying the targeted rate for these schemes wear the same undies. They're the same people.
Weird if they wore the same undies before.
Yeah, it would be.
All in the same pair of undies.
Yeah. It might be a bit stinky.
So we just wanted to throw that question out. We were hoping to even do a rating scale, but even just give you a heads up of if you think this is highly worth it or not, based on the benefits, the added risks, the costs to community. Is this asset transfer worth pursuing? And even before pursuing consulting on, and just want to get that feedback based on what you've heard today.
Look, absolutely agree that the benefits to our community would be significant, and from that perspective it's worth pursuing. For me, the other side of that, though, is the challenge around we're already facing so many increased cost pressures.
Yeah, got it.
So this is just something else, another one. We've just done a 19.95% rates increase, and we can't repeat that next year. So we're going to have to be very, very careful in terms of what we're doing within the next few years. We're going to have to watch every penny. So I guess that probably doesn't really answer the question, but I'm giving you the two sides of
but I can drop you anyway.
Yeah. And then knowing that on top of the 1%, we're going to have to then invest in the assets as well. And Lord Almighty, who knows what that's then going to cost, because otherwise we're just then inheriting the existing problems that are already there, and then we're the ones that are going to be held accountable for them, not regional council, who is at the moment.
I guess that might raise the question, around what local water done well looks like and the timing of that, because it might be just a timing issue for this to think about how we might manage that. So we work this transfer just prior to any sort of local water done well, that, it sort of almost just passes through
Yeah.
the room rather than sitting with us for too long. But
And then why would we bother to do that rather than just leave it for regional council to transfer it to local waters done well? What would be the point
Yeah, so
of it transitioning through us?
I guess it's the risk of leaving it
Yeah.
as is and not keeping this process running.
Yeah.
You know, like every event, it was triggered by the 2020 floods, and now we think about Cyclone Gabriel and how many years are going to roll by when flooding's not going to be our top priority.
Yeah.
And, you know, we've left opportunity.
yeah.
You sound like Councillor McGrath.
Did their assets flood or did our assets flood?
It's Napier's asset.
Just get all your undies on.
Yeah, it's our residents.
Same undies, Richard.
Their homes.
So are we saying we can do it better or differently, or
We're
what?
saying that it can be done better if it's done by one entity, and we think we have done.
Right.
Would
I-
ownership
abs-
have to change for us to have the control that you want? Or could it be achieved by some kind of management agreement?
I'm going to start pointing to where I'm from, Wellington Water,
Okay.
right? And start saying that as soon as you do not package ownership, control of the rates and control of the investment together so that you're controlling the risks and the benefits at the same time and all the accountability, then you're going to end up with finger pointing and you're going to end up in the same situation.
You ask though.
Yep, no, you have to absolutely ask. And look, I'm probably not a big proponent of Wellington Water, so.
By the sounds of things.
Can I take Phil's response a little bit further? All right, he's put his hand up and said, we can do it better. We just talked about them building 2 pump stations. Are they going to build it to our standard or their standard, knowing that they're going to hand it over?
Those are to 1 in 50-year flood event standards.
Is it how we would do it?
Yeah, we've actually shared our mechanical and electrical spec with them. We are having early meetings with procurement around that for them. So we are being involved in that design process and giving input into what those pump stations will look like.
Awesome answer. So does the organisation think it's ready to take this on now or when?
So there's a couple of bits to that, right? So we do have, there are next steps that if you were to wanting to pursue this. I mean, one is that obviously your council has to make a decision to consult, which is not going to happen now because you can't make decisions in workshops like you're hearing. But there is a consultative process as well. The anticipation, at least having spoken to Hawke's Bay Regional Council, would be that if they were looking to get a commitment to consult, that would probably be around December this year, with a plan to get the consultation wrapped up with their annual plan, and I think they've got an LTP amendment planned for next year as well, so to wrap it up with that as part of one consultative process. It would most likely be efficient to do this through some form of joint arrangement around the consultation, not a joint consultation. Advice from lawyers is that is incredibly messy and fraught, but at least building the same consultation materials together. So developing a set of the statement of proposal, the other consultation materials being joined together so that the decision is made at the same time. So whether Napier is ready, that's a Phil and Russell question about whether you'd be ready to take it on 1 July 2025, which would be the date that would be lined up with that consultation timeline. I can't answer whether Napier is ready.
Have you done this workshop with HBRC?
Next week.
Next week.
I'm sure they'll champion it.
I don't think that there's going to be many questions from them about it. Yeah.
I know, just interesting to know feedback.
Here you go.
Yeah.
I think, our top priority really is the safety and security of our people. And they are already asking us, is it going to be the same if it rains again? What are you doing about the drains? What are you doing about the pumps? And sooner or later, we need to take that on board. Because we don't want a repeat of what happened Cyclone Gabriel, and it looks like, with the weather changes, it could be. I think this is something that's really important, and I'm glad we're discussing it. Sure, it's going to cost the ratepayer, but it will cost them even more if we're not prepared for the next rain bomb, basically.
Yeah. If their houses are flooded, it's
Exactly.
the cost to them, whether it's financial or social, is significantly larger than any cost they're going to pay through rates.
We become uninsurable, and that's a big thing, and then we had insurance today, that was our thing. And then if we don't do this, if we can be seen to improve this, surely then we're looked upon as it's
Being responsible.
well, and also insurance companies must look at it and go, wow, the systems are better, blah, blah. I don't know whether they do or not, but they're certainly not going to say, I'm not going to insure your house anymore, which is what will happen.
It's the buck stopping with us stuff, though,
Yeah.
to make sure that we're ready
Yeah.
to do it. Because
Exactly.
I agree with you, Maxine, but if the organisation is not ready and not able to actually deliver on what we say we should or want to, we've got staff of 760, we've got 600 projects in our cycle system, we've got all these other, competing priorities. So it's about understanding our capabilities internally with our resourcing and ability to actually deliver what we want to deliver to provide that security to our residents.
And at the end of the day, the Hawke's Bay Regional Council has the exact same responsibilities to our community as we do. So, which some may say currently aren't delivering on, some may say. So I think we need to look at this in a holistic way, and I agree completely. The number one priority is around the safety of our community. But if we're not in a position to actually be doing anything better than how regional council's doing at the moment, why on earth would we put our hand up to take over the assets? We've got a huge capital program. Are we going to have the capacity and the ability to fund this extra work in the foreseeable future? No one's going to argue that the safety comes first, but if we can't deliver.
And if regional, I think we all feel like for regional council this is a good deal, given the current environment that they find themselves in, so this is a good deal. But I want to know their thoughts around how much sweeter can you make the deal? If you've got $2 million of debt attached to it, well, do you want to give us $2 million to take them off your hands? There's got to be some other things, some other options, and those ideas need to come from them. And I think for us, understanding how our officers or officers from both councils are working together and the conversations that you guys might be having at your level, that's all part of the picture as well for us to, we need to be innovative and we need to, have those types of conversations, I think, and understand exactly what the options are.
I was just thinking if we could get to, in terms of helping the team move forward, whether there's something like some sort of business case or a piece of work, is there something that we could look at to think about about answering these questions about could we be ready? Is next year the right time, or is it the year after, or when? I'm just sort of thinking how to keep the team moving. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, just along those lines. I think this is a very, very similar and parallel process to coastal hazards. And I think we need to be mindful of that because we're giving them this beautiful gift of a coastal hazard that they are going to have to fund. And in that process of developing that, we got external legal opinion to get over the political hump. Whether we would need that or not, given that we've got this sort of tit for tat going on, I don't know. But another key piece of work that we did in that is the memorandum of understanding, and that could be quite helpful because that tells us that deals with the here and now between what we do with those assets before we vest them into council, which could give us, the team are already all over it, but it could give us just that extra level of certainty. The other thing you mentioned about doing consultation at the end of this year, but I know coastal hazards isn't until March, and surely they would just do one long-term plan amendment. It's been delayed.
No, I think you said they were going to do it alongside the annual plan
And
consultation.
they'll do the actual consultation alongside their annual plan, LTP amendment consultation.
I think this.
So
Coastal hazards is in March.
Which is typically when you do annual plan.
so their decision.
They're doing separate, but.
Sorry, so at the end of this year would just be the council decision to consult. Rather than necessarily the actual consultation.
Oh, right.
And then there's obviously a period of time where you've got to gather the materials and prepare the materials.
Yes, okay.
Hawke's Bay Regional Council believe that that's an achievable timeline.
Yeah, okay.
Can I just
And the MOU is absolutely within that kind of formalise and agree transfer arrangements. There's definitely an idea of a memorandum of transfer, which could be developed earlier if we wanted to deal with something around what we're going to do about it in the meantime. Sorry.
I just, I think there is a, oh, sorry. Sorry.
I was just going to say, I think strategically, I think it's a really good move for us because I think if we are looking at some sort of Three Waters entity, we want to position ourselves to probably be the main player in that regionally as well, and acknowledging I think there is a whole lot of water to go under the bridge before we get to a Three Waters entity, especially considering our current sort of political climate. So I do worry if we don't make a move that we could be 5 years, like 5 years is a blink of an eyelid almost in public policy, and then we haven't made a significant move forward, so I take that point. And the other thing, and Councillor Crown raised it at the beginning, and I don't necessarily think we got there around the comms and how this is managed, because I think there is a huge opportunity around telling the shared service story, we're listening to the recommendations that came out of the cyclone and the flood and looking for those efficiencies and telling people what they'll get for it as well. I know that this organisation has been working for a long time around how we look after our open waterways, and if they were all under our control, then we could probably sell a story on what we will deliver as part of owning those assets cohesively as well. So I think that point around communication probably shouldn't be lost, because strategically I think you could sell it very well.
I was just going to say, I think, I get your point, Hayley, but I think there is a big difference between coastal hazard and Napier doing we're going to collect rates to do our Napier stormwater, whereas coastal hazard is the whole of Hawke's Bay. And it means the regional council basically, they're taking it on to be the collection agency, because no other council will be able to do it on their own.
So, Russell, in response to your question, I need to have confidence that we have the capacity, the capability, and to take on these assets and to invest in them appropriately to ensure that they are doing what they need to do on behalf of our community. So that, whether that's a business case, whatever that looks like in terms of providing us with that information and a realistic timeline around how we could, achieve that, and the best time to transfer the assets. That's what I need to see.
Because I think that touch on a bit on what Richard was saying earlier about, the people in the field as well. And it's almost, what does the business look like for that activity? And no, totally agree. So that's probably something quite key to.
It's a bit of work that.
It's not quite within the business case that we're talking about, actually.
It's
So
a bit more
that's a bit detailed, because that is, so there is a business case underlying this that's currently in draft, working its way through, trying to get through approvals before it can be released. But that does not get into detail about how Napier would structure itself to deliver this. That's kind of almost a operational service delivery type review, almost touching into like Section 17A type territory, but not.
I guess it's a chicken egg thing.
Yeah.
Do you need that information now to make the decision that we want to go?
I think that's what I'm hearing from the room. And no, definitely. And I think that might lead into your question too.
I just want to say, so through the long-term plan, we agreed to the full rate revenue financing policy review.
Yep.
And this targeted rate would mean we have to do one so that it was in effect, I think, by the 1st of July next year. So we have the consultant meetings to go back to.
So we've committed to the revenue financing review in 2026.
It's,
So presumably we could do a review of the one activity though, right? Yeah.
But I think there's a lot of work to be done to answer those questions, to then work out what that rating cost would need to be. So, okay.
So we're talking about the operative side of things. I'd certainly need to have a good understanding that we can meet that. And I absolutely agree with what you were saying, Kirsten, of whether we can slot it in, fit it in, pay for it, all those sorts of things. But my question, just a quick question, if HBRC are building 2 new pump stations, what's the cost associated to them, or what's that worth?
The estimates I've seen put it at about 15 million.
15 million.
Yeah, and I don't believe that that's been debt funded. I think they've got some IAF funding behind that,
And so that's already in there.
or flood resilience funding, or one of these millions of government pots.
That could be part of the memorandum of
inherit
transition, eh?
that asset,
Yep.
Yeah.
we don't want a $15 million bill to come to it and try and slot it in with
No.
other things.
So-
We have
so-
to give up to do that.
That
So
needs to be done before we do anything.
So what that asset would do to some of these numbers, it increases your book value of your assets by 15 million because they're not depreciated because they're brand new. It will increase your average, the average increase in stormwater rate would probably go up to $50 because you'd have to fund the depreciation on those assets to make sure you could replace them at some point in the future. We don't anticipate there being debt coming across, so that's those 2 key elements where it would change. So depreciation goes up by about $250,000 just from those 2 assets.
And have we, like I would say, just off the cuff, that the level of service being offered to Napier by the regional council is very low, and we may want a higher level of service. Let's say we needed a pump station on the Typo because it's at full capacity, or we need to upgrade, I see Kenny, is it the Kenny
Road
pump or something?
Yep.
We need to be either ready to do that smartly, or how do we get on there? Or at least assess them and make decisions.
Yeah, so we've got a whole pile of asset information that has been collected around that. And I think, remember, Hawke's Bay Regional Council haven't, whether or not they've been providing the level of service is a different question, but they haven't been sitting idly by not making investment plans around these assets. So there are investment plans that we can at least inherit and work with, but that might have to form part of that picture of what is the investment plan.
And that might be something that needs to come back to us at what sort of time period you're looking to work that through, or because if it doesn't match our level of service, then we've got a time period of risk.
So certainly when I was talking about those really big upgrades, those are designed to meet that level of service. Now, not all of those upgrades have to happen all at once, and those are across all of the drains in that Napier-Miani catchment. So it's not just one drain we're talking about when I was talking about those really big numbers. So there is a list of upgrades that do need to occur to be able to meet that level of service. There's a prioritisation process that has to be gone through, either between yourselves or just yourselves and Hawke's Bay Regional Council, depending, I guess, ultimately on who owns the assets and who's going to want to control that.
So one of the things I've asked the team to look at upgrading our stormwater master plan. With that in mind, with the work that Regional Council's done with looking at the level of service on some of those drains and pump stations, and being quite a lot lower than what was expected, that we're looking at, looking at some of those pump stations discharging to the ocean, or how do we manage the stormwater in a flood event when we can't take a 1 in 50-year event through the city out to the estuary? So how do we manage that so it doesn't just pond in our suburbs? So that's a piece of work, and we do, like the last master plan, it takes into account the regional council's pump stations as well, and we look at it as a whole system, and so that hopefully will answer your, we look at those gaps and levels of service.
And that kind of highlights the problem a little bit too, right? Is that you look at it as a whole system, but there's HBRC assets that might be part of that chain to be able to make it work.
Sorry, this is a question probably should have asked right at the start, but can you just clarify, where does the tributaries, is it mainly just within our Napier City borders, or is there some like rural land upstream that could come in and flood these networks?
These are the 2 catchments. Just skipping forward and on the presentation here. So of course, there's clearly nothing to the south because you've got the river in the way.
Right.
And I believe you've also got, I'm terrible with Napier geography, so excuse me, but I believe you also have a river to the north.
Yeah, that's quite a big one.
Roughly where the estuary is, right? So any water north of the estuary is going to not reach these tributaries, and then the rest of it is that hillside that is part of your
right. So it's just within our
boundary anyhow.
Yeah.
So
Sorry.
th-
Yeah,
this
no,
is-
that's cool.
This is the only side we're looking to take over? Do they have
The
anything?
blue and yellow stuff, yep.
They don't have anything the other side out towards Eskdale or
They
Bayview or
have, so,
anything?
so this blue zone,
Make them very clear.
there's some little bits on this blue zone over here. But we're not looking for you guys to take over, because that yellow area is all down.
Yeah.
The
Okay.
rural
Still
drainage
within
for
our
Bayview
scope.
is ours.
That's, yeah, okay, it's all road drainage.
Yeah, and rural.
Yeah, they only have a stop bank around the airport and the farm. They don't have any pump stations.
So, do you have what you need from us?
Do you have what you need from us? Was our question.
No, we were predicting that.
The only thing that concerns me, the elephant in the room for me, is this is one water. We have to make changes to 3 waters. And I don't know how well we can just look at one in isolation to the others in terms of the overall cost and capability and what we have to do. So, I mean, I'm not going to start a whole conversation about that, but I think it needs to be put in context.
And I guess that's part of what I'm asking for. So we need
Okay.
an understanding of what the implications are for us in taking over these assets. And when, when it makes sense for us to do that in terms of looking at capability and capacity and funding and all the rest of it. And that will then help us juggle it with all the other priorities we have, not just in the water space, but everything else that we've got. But we need a really clear understanding of what this means for us at an operational and, asset management level.
Okay.
So I think we've got a clear direction about what sounds like the big issues are that need to be addressed and tackled for you guys to be able to make a decision. So that's what we came here for.
Cool. All good. Okay, any final questions before we wrap up? No? Excellent. Thank you very much.
Excellent.
Thank you.